Hi there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. Today we are going to be doing some really basic emboss resist technique, which is definitely a technique that is popular and yet I don't find that I do it very often. So I'm going to start off today with a piece of watercolor paper. I use the Holtz watercolor paper for blending my Oxide inks just because I find it such a good paper to blend on. Now everybody has their favorite paper to blend, so use whatever you have, but that is just my preference. And then I'm going to use these two magenta stamps here. Now these are maybe a couple of the first stamps that I ever purchased when I began card making, so I'm positive that these aren't available, but go for something that has a little bit of leaves and foliage and bits and pieces down the bottom, and then I went for something a little bit taller like the daisies up the top. So I am going to ink this up with some VersaMark ink, which is just a sticky embossing ink. I've used my anti-static powder bag on here to make sure that the embossing powder just goes where I add the ink. And then I'm just lining up my cardstock so that I get my image to be not quite on the bottom of my paper. I want the bottom of my paper to stay clear, and actually here I decide to bring in a little scrap of paper so that I know it's not going to stamp further down than I want it to. So this is one handy thing about using a stamping tool. This is one that I love. This is actually from Lincraft in New Zealand, which I know New Zealand and Australia have. And I believe a little while ago I saw someone had found one on Amazon maybe, or eBay, I can't remember. Anyhow, I've got a couple of daisies here, and without adding embossing powder to my first stamp, I'm going to add my second stamp just gently over top, press down with my VersaMark ink, and then I have both stamps there which have made their image on my paper, and now I will add some white embossing powder. Now you can either add white or clear because the paper behind it is white, so if you use clear it would obviously stay white anyhow, so whichever you prefer to use here is fine. I often like using a super fine embossing powder just because I find that even if I'm not doing really small fussy images, if you don't want to have too many embossing powders on hand, it's better to have the finer one over the slightly larger grains, which is the normal one. So I usually, if I'm picking up an embossing powder, I pick up the super fine ones. But again, just whatever you have and whatever is your favorite go-to. Once I have melted all of the powder with my heat gun, then I'm able to go ahead and start putting inks on. So I'm going to use today some chipped sapphire and Seedless preserves. Now the reason that I've gone with some kind of darkish inks here is because I want the white embossing, the emboss resist, to really stand out. So you can definitely do light colors and things, that would work really well as well, but it definitely works a little bit better if you have darker colors, and then the white resist will really show through. So I'm adding some of the Seedless preserves, which is just a purple color. Again, you could do this with any dye inks, and I think even pigment inks would be fine. They would work well with the resist. It's not just oxides that work or just distress inks. You're able to do this with most inks, and the plastic coating that we stamped with that image will resist everything. So I'm adding the chipped sapphire up in the corner here. There was no rhyme or reason as to why I did this much 50-50 or 40-60, whatever you want to call it, of the panel. I just wanted a little bit of purple and a little bit of blue. Then you can see it's really important to gently buff off the color off the top of the embossing because it takes off some of the ink which is sitting there and definitely makes it come out a little bit more bright white. I am using a little bit of low-tack tape on the back of my fingers there to hold the panel because the ink is still wet and I don't want my fingerprints in it. Now again, this is a really old stamp. I showed this one a couple of videos ago, and I want just parts of the text on my panel here, my card front. So usually I would take the stamp to my card front, but today I'm taking my card front to the stamp because it's a wooden block and I don't want the whole thing covered in text. So I inked it up using some VersaFine Onyx black ink, and then I am just going to press my fingers into the bit where I want the text to go. And that way I don't have to have my whole panel covered, but it just adds a little something to the background. So you could do this with any stamp that you have. It doesn't have to be a background stamp. It just adds a little bit of background noise there to not make it quite so plain. I'm making sure to heat set this before I go ahead and put a little bit of water on here. Now usually I'm not a big fan of water splats, I will admit that. I feel like you did all of this beautiful work and then you're putting water splatters on it. But anyhow, today I felt like the card needed it. And you can see in the bottom right hand corner there's a big blob of water. This is one problem with splatting water, is that it can be a bit uncontrollable. So I just picked a little bit of the water up with a little paper towel there. Then I'm going to heat set it, and the one good thing about these inks here is that you can come back in just with the same colour that I used before, which is the Chip Sapphire, and just gently go over top of it, and it won't erase the big blob there, but it will definitely make it a little less obvious because it stood out a little too much to me. So I've just got a few wee splatters there. Then I have the With Sympathy. I needed a sympathy card. By the time that you guys see this, it will actually already have gone to the people that it was intended for. So I'm using some Morning Mist colour, which is just a grey ink, which is from the VersaFine clear ink line. Then I'm using a border die there just to cut the bottom. I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine with a little bit of tape to hold it exactly in place. I'm trying to get it roughly symmetrical and lined up with the words. Again, I'm using this for a sympathy card, but this could be for any occasion at all, and that's always the kind of cards that I go for, that you can change up the sentiment without it being kind of swayed in one direction more than the other. So you could definitely use this for any occasion. I have cut off a little bit off the top there because I had more than I needed, and this is looking good. This is a really quick, simple card to do. It didn't take me very long at all. I'm adding a little bit of foam tape there to the back of my sentiment just to lift it up off the front panel. I did decide to go around with a little bit of black soot distress oxide ink. I am using a finger dauber, and that gives me really good control to go around the outside and just darken up those edges a little bit. This panel has been cut to 4 by 5 1/4 inches so that it leaves a nice little border around when I pop it on my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card base. Now I do get lots of people asking where I get my card bases and things from. I buy the Nina Solar White cardstock from wherever I can get a good price. Here in New Zealand it's not really easy to get a hold of. But I do cut all of my cardstock down myself. I cut all of my card panels down myself, and I cut all of my card bases myself as well, score and fold them. I cut everything with my little Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer, and I just do them in bulk when I need them. When I'm running low, I will sit there one evening and just go for gold to make sure that I have a good stash. So I hope that answers that question. But this is my card all finished for today. Really nice, plain and simple card that I hope inspires you to try yourself. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks, bye!